up inside of a company and kind of knowing all the ins and outs of an organization. But there's also value in being, especially when it comes down to speed and efficiency and problem solving and making decisions, having a consulting lens to kind of framework out a problem, identify an approach, test hypotheses, figure out what the big obstacles are, and kind of work through those. I think the other piece that is more less tactical is just being able to manage stakeholders as well. Like within consulting, you're going to meet tens of hundreds of different people, great people to work with, people who don't want to work with consultants and give them the time of day. Like it's going to span the gamut, but all of that is an incredibly valuable experience as you develop like your leadership style, approach, communication style, and increase your effectiveness in meetings and managing projects. That translates one for one, if not more so, out in industry.
That's awesome, and I loved kind of how you put that with the stakeholders. It's no matter where you go, you're juggling these. That's part of the training here. Aditi, I want to hit the same question with you because you've made that transition more recently, and you came from the tech practice into tech. Wondering if you just give us a quick sort of sense of how that's translated this year since you've made the move, and then we'll get into some of these great questions that folks are starting to put into the chat.
For sure, thanks, Phil. And I would echo what Sarah just said. I think for me, like just building the relationships with stakeholders as part of the tech practice, like gave me a window into how it would be, in the tech sector, specifically just working for multiple tech companies as part of Kearney, just gave me an idea of, how the industry works and a good lens into that. And really knowing how to cultivate these relationships with multiple stakeholders, learning how to, really tailor the communication depending on who you were talking to, whether it was the executive or it was like a working level client, really helped me build that skill set, which is very useful now because I'm working with multiple like BUs, like project management, finance, sales, like different teams. So it's really helpful, really know how to tailor the message. And so I would just say it's all about relationships, and Kearney really helps you learn how to navigate that and learn how to, build that clarity of thought and communication.
Yeah, that's encouraging. We got a couple of questions here, and I'll answer just the one quickly from Lawrence because I think it's pretty specific. The PE practice, you don't have to have a PE background to work in PE. So if you want to talk about it more, email me offline, but we're not expecting you to bring in private equity experience before you consult. I like this next one though, on how Kearney supported your transition out of the firm and into your careers. And I'll just leave it open to the group. I'm wondering if anyone from the panel has thoughts on their experience from transitioning out of Kearney and sort of what resources and support you received while you were doing that.
Happy to share my thoughts. So Kearney didn't source my opportunity for me. So in the most literal sense, they weren't involved in that. However, I have to say, like, the amount of support and encouragement, that I got when I shared, that I was leaving and why I was leaving was great. And then the standout really for me though has been like how connected you remain within the community. So I see Kearney people probably at least once a month. And whether that's, just quick catch up. I had breakfast with one of my former colleagues last week. I'm constantly texting people, partners that I used to work with, reaching out and sort of seeing how things are going. There's a huge alumni network within Estee Lauder. So it's kind of nice to be able to sort of have that support as well. So maybe not the exact answer to your question, but that was definitely my experience.
Oh, it's exact enough, Alex. If you look in the sort of world of LinkedIn, you'll see that Alex is by far from the first senior Kearney leader from our consumer practice to go join the halls of Estee Lauder. So we have a rich history. I guess anyone else from the group, and you know, I know that we have a sort of variety of channels that will sort of help you out, but anyone else with thoughts on sort of that transition and sort of when you sort of were thinking about making the move, and then ultimately when you made it, you know, who'd you talk to, how did that decision ultimately land, and then how has that helped you since you've been in your new role?
Yeah, I can give my perspective from what I remember about formal and kind of the informal process. So there are definitely structures in place at Kearney to help people transition. Nobody is surprised when you say, like, I don't know if a long-term consulting career is for me. And the firm is incredibly supportive in trying to make sure that people find the right path that they're passionate about. So there's formal structures at the firm. Keep me accountable. It may have been updated, but like at the time, it's like you could take a secondment, you could do and like drop into a company and literally work there for a short period of time, depending on availability with certain clients. That was an option that some of my peers had pursued, and that gave them kind of industry insight into those different roles in order to determine whether or not they wanted to make a full-time transition. There were some people who just wanted to break from consulting and wanted to do some soul searching, so they took like time, like extended leave. And during that time as well, like as part of that, if they wanted to solely focus on recruiting, like they were able to dedicate time like that. For me, and I think most people fall into the third bucket as well. It's like once you kind of decide internally that like you want to start pursuing something outside of industry, you start interviewing, you reach out with headhunters. And that's where I really tapped into my mentors and peers at Kearney to get advice and insight into the different companies. I mean, the best thing about being part of Kearney and the alumni network is we basically have somebody at most major large corporation that you could possibly want to work at. And it's super easy to get in touch with those folks. They're usually 1 or 2 degrees of separation to hop on a call and say like, hey, I'm thinking about interviewing here. What do you think? And I've never been declined a coffee chat, and I've never been declined like help in the interview process and helping me vet all the different options. So all to say, there's a lot of support. As Alex mentioned, on the flip side, as an alum, like you also continue to receive support and stay in touch with your network. Like I left at Hershey, but even in my Diageo role when I moved here, I had folks from Kearney reaching out and saying like, hey, we just published a report on spirits, like here, take a look. Or hey, like we haven't caught up in a while, like let me know what you're working on, let's bounce ideas off of each other. And so there's been just a consistent outpouring of support from Kearney even post leaving.
I could probably chime in briefly as well. So similar to Alex in that the role that I ended up getting wasn't necessarily driven by Kearney, but I would say without Kearney, there's no way I get the role that I'm in currently right now. The work experience that I was able to build within kind of the retail space and consumer space more broadly really did set me up from a subject matter awareness perspective to be qualified. But then interestingly, a lot of the involvement that I had with our summer program, with our recruiting team, with a lot of the other things that maybe go out of your quote unquote traditional main consulting effort also did really position me well for this. So I think there's a breadth of areas where you can gain really great experience that then sets you up for success coming out of the firm.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that your clients will start trying to hire you like out of the gate. So it's not like there's a lack of opportunities, but when you're open to the door, I think Deepak, that's a great reflection. Also great to have the alumni when you're still a consultant, because I call a bunch of these folks all the time for advice and perspective. So super useful. There's a great question that I want to ask that came through the chat. And it is, I want to ask all 4 of you what it is. Is there one thing you miss from your time at Kearney that you wish your current employer has? Like, what do you miss about the firm? Help us feel better.
I can at least lead off because I've had to do some travel lately for recruiting. Our travel process was way better. It is so much more painful to have to work through that in industry. So I know that's probably not the most pressing answer, but that's been one general observation. The other thing for me probably, I think, is just like the wealth of knowledge within the firm. You have a lot of really smart and talented people in industry as well, but I think the ease with which in-house you can quickly find someone that has knowledge on a perhaps obscure topic, that's definitely something I miss.
Yeah. It's interesting how that's like part of the just structure here, right? So What else? What do people miss?
I can jump in since I'm fairly recent and sometimes I do face the FOMO about leaving consulting. So I think one of the biggest things is just the exposure to wider varieties of companies and getting to know more people. So the experience, it's so fast-paced back in Kearney that you were, changing projects every couple of months, meeting a lot more people and getting an insight into many different companies and industries. So that's something which is something I miss a lot, especially in my first 3 months in the industry.
Yeah.
I'd agree with everything that's been said. And I would say, more specifically, the training. Like I just found, and it starts in the summer, but I found that the training programs that Kearney puts you through throughout your career are not only super helpful from a soft and hard skill perspective, but also are just really fun and like great opportunities to meet a whole bunch of super smart, super interesting people. And I think that's one thing that like Kearney has absolutely nailed, which is hard to do. So I think that that's definitely best in class. But I'd agree with everything that the others have shared as well.
Yeah, I echo all of that. Like training at Kearney, starting with your summer all the way to like associate training and manager, like it's excellently put together. Like I haven't had as effective training in industry at either Hershey or Diageo, to be honest, since that. Also the people, I mean, echo that as well, obviously, like just really smart people, and you build such camaraderie because of the way that the firm structures like the internship process, the onboarding process, start dates, trainings. Like Alex and I summered together, and we continue to bump into each other throughout our time at the firm as well, and even now as alumni. So there's just a kindred spirit that you build among the people that work at the firm. And then I would say the one other thing that I miss now coming into industry, and more specific to this role, is just the variety and opportunity to explore. Like Kearney is one of the few consulting firms that really does not hold any bars. Like you don't have to align to a practice right away, and they commit to that. Like I worked on potatoes, I worked on transportation, I was in Halifax. It runs the gamut. And I think that's unique in the experience at Kearney.
I second all those things, and it makes me very grateful to be here. But there's a couple of other interesting questions coming up in the Slido, so I'll just shoot them out. But what cultural differences have you observed between Kearney and your current company, and how did that transition work? How did you handle that sort of culture shift when you left consulting and headed into industry? Wonder if you had any other thoughts there.
I can
go, Sarah, go.
I would say the biggest thing that I've noticed culturally is just like a change in priorities. And I don't think it's good or bad. It's just what you're looking for at the stage in your life. But at Kearney, obviously everybody is going to be incredibly successful, driven, ambitious, want to dig in, get stuff going. I'm going to get you this deck tomorrow morning because I want to. And in industry, especially at Diageo, like things move slower. People sign off at 5 p.m. They're going to equally prioritize picking up their kids as they are like turning around information right away. And so that's been just that shift in priorities is the biggest change that I've noticed. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. It's, again, I think depending on where you're at in your life and what works best for you, then you adapt accordingly.
Alex, do you have another thought on the culture shift?
Yeah, it was a big, almost a year into Mac. It was a big culture change, like just wildly different. Probably obviously, like, just look at my background, like it's very different. It's different reality. But I think it's also like the level of depth of knowledge that I have now, like working in industry, is different than in consulting. So yeah, like when I was a consultant, I was super fast paced. We're like able to go in, solve the problem, shake things up and then leave. That was wonderful. And I got so much out of that. It's very different than living it. And, now I have to live with those recommendations and actually see them through and like work through the hard stuff, which, is very different. So you have to kind of figure out how to make your culture work with you as well. So I don't know, hard to articulate, but it's very different. And it's good and it's bad.
Well, and I get this actually segues into the next question. So Alex, maybe I'll ask you, and then would love to get Deepak or Aditi to jump in on this one. But it's when you think about the engagements you've worked on in the space, maybe for the same client or someone else, and then going in and sort of rolling up your sleeves and being part of the business. Like, how is that experience different? You gave a little bit of the sort of like you got to do the hard stuff, but like, what's the pace like? Like, how do you interact with the consulting world now that you're a client?
Kearney is still actively involved in my life. I think where it's so much of what I do today is thinking through like how to effectively get things done. So it might not, like what we're putting in place might not academically be the right answer, but it's combining sort of that right on paper with what we can achieve. And so I think living the organization, you have such a better sense for what is achievable. And so being able to take sort of strategy and like really think through what needs to be true for this to come to life and working with the organization to do that. That's sort of my reality today. And that's super rewarding. Like being able to do that and like actually see the results and actually understand, how it manifests into everyone's day to day. That can be super, super rewarding.
That's awesome. Deepak, do you have thoughts on this in terms of just like your engagements when you were at the firm versus, what you're living day to day now?
Yeah, so kind of building even on the last question, it is interesting because I think if I think about the number of, we'll call quote unquote layers to go into leadership and organ structure, if I think about the number of layers between myself and our CEO, it's probably actually not that indifferent between, say, myself and David Hanflown when I was at Kearney. But I would say the level of formality, right, is very different. Like I could walk into David's office and say hello and ask him a question. You don't really have that happening with the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company in the same way. So I think it's kind of a mixture of both a difference in culture, what I might miss a little bit about Kearney, all of that in one. But then I think it has different implications in a slightly opposite direction for me as well, where because they're also very busy and to what Sarah had mentioned, the pace is a little bit slower. It also creates a little bit more room to work through certain things in a different way with my immediate leadership and then kind of really bake things out before we get it out in front of a leader. Whereas with a partner at the firm, there was a lot more fast ideation. Now it's a much more, you need to have a finished, fully built up perspective, sharing that viewpoint with them, all of the T's crossed, all of the I's dotted. So it's different, but in a, I guess, not necessarily good or bad way. It's different.
Yeah. Well, I will say, a little tongue in cheek, but our managing partner, Alex Liu, if you send him an email, he will get back to you no matter who you are within like 15 minutes. It's a wild thing. So like that sort of accessibility culture, I think we do to an extreme here in some ways. Not necessarily would expect that from any large multi-billion-dollar enterprise. So we got a couple more here on just sort of the overall kind of mechanics of how life at Kearney works. And so I guess I'll ask this a comment on this one first. Did anyone here do a comment while they were at the firm? No.
I didn't do a secondment, but I had a leave of absence for probably like 2 months at some point, probably 6 months in at manager.
You want to talk about that for a second, Deepak?
Yeah, absolutely. So candidly, I think the context is that the timing for when I did it was also like in the throngs of COVID. So this was like late 2020. So just having been in work from home mode for 9 months and some things within my extended family more broadly, like there was a lot of stress going on in general. And even the transition from associate to manager is always a very interesting one, I think, in terms of level of responsibility, expectation, and growth. So I had just more or less at a point where I was like, I think I need a little bit of a longer break than what my 4 weeks of vacation is going to afford me at this point. And the firm was very flexible. I think it was a couple of very simple, basic conversations. Fairly shortly thereafter, we were able to coordinate scheduling for that, and then be able to get a solid 8 to 10 weeks of time to just take a little bit of a breather, reset more broadly in the midst of all of the craziness, and get us into a good place coming out of that, so that the rest of my time at the firm was a lot more, I think, personally impactful for me in a way that it may not have otherwise been without that break.
I love that story. I think it hits a bunch of really important points about the experience here. And like, there aren't a lot of jobs where you can just like stop for 2 months and then come back and the same job is available for you. And we really do try to make that available. I think leaves of absence have been increasingly popular the last couple of years because of just the toll that the remote work transition and COVID and everything has taken. And so I'm very glad to hear you were able to find that time. But it's something we're seeing a lot more of these days, and we definitely encourage.
Phil, I actually did a secondment. I just forgot.
Oh, I forgot that too. Say more, Alex.
So it was kind of odd because I was on my almost my first project I was on for a year and a half, which is very not normal for Kearney Consulting. And it was a series of different projects, but it was the same beauty client that I was on for a long time. And then I was pregnant, and I had sort of a month between when my engagement ended and when I needed to go on maternity leave. And so I seconded for a month with the client, where I basically was like chief of staff kind of to the chief supply chain officer to just kind of handle some of the communications around the org changes that he was making. So I did that. And it was all sort of arranged between the partner and the client, and it was like wonderful, and I have nothing but good things to say. And then also nothing but good things to say about Kearney's maternity policy, or the parental leave policy, which I did twice when I was at Kearney. And it was like, Phil, to your point of like being able to kind of totally step away and then totally come back was absolutely wonderful. And after both kids, I stayed, like even after my second one, I still stayed for probably 2 years. So it's very much it can be very sustainable if done in the right way. So I just add that, even though that wasn't the question, I answered that question.
I'm glad. Did you do P for P? I can't remember.
Yeah, both times.
P for P is a Pathways for Parents program. Alex, maybe describe a little bit about what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll probably get the exact policy details wrong, so I will try not to talk about them.
It's all changed anyway. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I had between being totally off after having a child, and working on internal projects, or non-client facing projects, I should say. I had the total of 12 months each time. And I took it both times with both of my kids. So it took 6 months off, and then I did 6 months of sort of non-client facing projects when I was back. The first time it was very much like firm building focused projects. And then the second time when I came back, I really wanted to still do like client type of work. So I built, I worked on building out some consumer research, and sort of a point of view on millennial shoppers, and ended up using that work as part of a pitch for a client that we won the work on. And then my transition back to client work was actually then seeing that project through. So it was like really, it like, let's be real, it's also hard to have 2 young kids and do consulting. for all the reasons that I'm sure are obvious to everyone, but it was such a wonderful experience both times.
Were you on TV a bunch too?
Yeah, as part of that consumer research.
That's what I remember. We're getting near the end, so I want to sort of hit with a lighthearted-ish question. Wondering what your kind of favorite Kearney trip is, the sort of non-project related experience. We've talked about training a little bit, but like, what are some of the other like fun experiences you had either through your summer or when you were a consultant here that you remember fondly about your time at the firm?
I can jump in here. Most of my consulting was during the pandemic, so we weren't traveling as much. So when I joined full time, I was wondering, okay, is it going to be the consulting I thought it was without all the travel, without meeting folks in person? But I think Kearney made it a point to make sure we had a good experience. So we had a lot of like office events that were virtual. We had, as part of our projects, we always made sure to do like team events. We had like a games night. We played code names once during like a virtual happy hour. We sponsored lunch once a month to make sure everybody felt engaged. We had all of those like virtual meetups to make sure that everybody felt engaged. So I really appreciated that we could still make it a very engaging experience, though it had to be virtual.
Yeah.
I'm happy to chime in here as well as a multi-summer program leader for Chicago, and then also more recently having involvement in the national program. I candidly think Kearney does an amazing job in terms of the summer experience and a lot of the events. So like even during the summer, between all of the local office events and getting to know the city you're in and the people that you get to meet, Chicago does a great job with the riverboat cruise and a number of other events that we run in Chicago. Similarly, learning about the firm, which I know did actually happen this summer. So coming out of COVID, just that opportunity to meet all of your fellow summer cohort members in New York and have a great couple of days together. Again, literally learning about the firm, but really building your network and having a great time in the process. And then selfishly, I would say post-summer, but in the full-time space, I also really enjoyed our firm-wide all-hands meeting in 2019 in Texas. That was a blast more broadly. So no shortage of fun events.
It's funny. I mean, like, we're a big firm, like we're in 40 plus countries, we're all around the world and stuff. You can fit our entire Americas into one like really big hotel. And it was incredible. Like honestly, like that was one of my favorite Kearney experiences too. Like just seeing everybody from people who had like been with the firm for 3 weeks to people who've been there for 40 years, like all in the same place, like 1,200 people. It was amazing. It was really such a cool event. Sarah, Alex, what are your fond memories of non-project experiences?
Alex, do you want to go?
You go first. I feel like yours was better than mine.
No, I was definitely gonna say learn about the firm and all hands. The all hands when I was there was in Scottsdale, but really fun. And then the one I was gonna add is like my rolling off, parting gift when I left for Hershey was like our team. We emailed off a steer code deck. We got in a car. We drove from Cincinnati to Kentucky and hit up Wild Turkey Distillery and then had a lovely dinner as like my goodbye. So that was pretty memorable and fun.
Sarah, where'd you go after Scottsdale? I don't remember.
I'm sorry?
Where did you go after Scottsdale? I don't remember. There were like 50 of us who went to Vegas after that trip. So.
Oh no, I didn't do that one. Yeah. I just did Scottsdale and then went home.
There we go. Alex,
my summer project was insane. So I was in Germany. I was all over the US. And because I was in London and because I was in Europe, we didn't come home for the weekends, which, you know, kind of sad, but also kind of fun to be in Europe on the weekends. And so like one weekend we went to Prague and had like pretty ridiculous weekend. All over Germany was super, super, super fun.
Yeah.
And I still keep in touch with the SBA and associate who are on that project with me, like none of us are at Kearney anymore, and we still like catch up once a month, even though we all live in different cities, because we're like became such good pals through that experience.
Yeah, that warms my heart. When so in 2011, before I left for B school, I worked in LA, and for a client, that entire team, we still have a little group text that goes together. And I saw one of them here in Maine a couple of weeks ago. One of them is in Atlanta. We ran into him a couple of years ago. So these are connections that last for literally decades of your life. If you want them to, it's a wonderful thing. We are close to time, and so I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for reflecting and sharing and giving sage advice. And on that note, maybe we can go around the horn just real quickly. And what advice would you have for our audience today? MBA ones looking at consulting for their MBA summers, and what would you advise them to do for the next couple of months and the next couple of years? Deepak, you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So I mean, I'll start by saying I don't think you could pick a better place to spend your summer than at Kearney and your post MBA start to your career at Kearney as a firm. But I think, I mean, my general advice, right, is really spend the time getting to know the people and who you're interacting with. I think fundamentally, as Sarah and several others have alluded to on this call, it is the people that really makes this experience a better one. And so take the time to figure out what works well for you and where you feel like you have that strong connection with the people, and hopefully that leads you to Kearney.
Let's go back around. Aditi, do you have advice for our audience?
Sure. So I would definitely echo what Deepak said. I think just getting to know more people and learning about their experiences is super crucial, because everybody has had different perspectives and different experiences. So definitely do that. Another thing that really helped me is just think about which practices would be interesting to you, where you would want to work, because you get one internship, one project. It's also always helpful to get a foot in the door into the practice you would like to work later on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sarah, what do you got?
Definitely agree with what Deepak and Aditi said. I guess one to add. So I think right now all of you are probably casing and preparing for Hell Week at your respective schools. So definitely practice your mental math, case like crazy, hit the numbers. And then once you get through the interview process, as Deepak said, like definitely just kind of get to know each of the companies. I would say that's the biggest differentiator, just the culture of the people to help inform your decision. Hopefully it's Kearney.
Hopefully it's Kearney. Alex, I'm going to close this out.
Yeah, I mean, great advice. I would agree with everything everyone says. And I would underscore the people piece, because like there's no hiding from the people. Like you spend so many hours together in small meeting rooms, and so you can't fake it. So you have to like the people you work with. And so really is, once you have your offers in hand, use it as an opportunity to understand, who you want to spend your days with.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone again. So Alex, Sarah, Aditi, Deepak, thank you for taking the time to talk with our audience. I will also offer up to everyone who's on the call, if you have questions about consulting life or whatever else we've talked about, feel free to reach out to me. Emily and Jen, who are on the line as well, can help direct your questions. But please be in touch. We love to kind of hear and engage with you as you're learning about the firm and making some choices. So with that, Emily, anything else you need to hit before we wrap up?
I'm just going to run through, just advertise our next webinar, which is interview prep. So that'll be a good one as we head into the interview season in January. And again, feel free to reach out to anyone on this call, as well as Kearney Careers at MBA at kearney.com if you have any questions. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.